Once, long ago, in a land of rolling hills and dusty valleys, there lived a group of people called the Israelites. They had a king named Saul, and he had a big army of soldiers. Right now, this army was in a lot of trouble. They were camped on one side of a wide valley, and on the other side, their enemies, the Philistines, were camped. Every single day, the Israelite soldiers would put on their armor, grab their swords and shields, and line up for a battle that never seemed to happen. They looked brave, but inside their hearts were trembling with fear. The reason for their fear was not the whole Philistine army, as big and strong as it was. No, the reason was one single man. But this was no ordinary man. He was a giant, the biggest, the strongest, and the fiercest man anyone had ever seen. He was covered from head to toe in heavy bronze armor. When he walked, the clanking of his armor was like thunder rolling through the valley. That sound made everyone who heard it shiver with dread. Every morning he strode into the middle of the valley of Elah. He would stand there, a mountain of a man. His voice was a roar that shook the very ground. "Why have you come out to fight? I am a Philistine, and you are the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down and fight me." When King Saul and the Israelite soldiers heard this, they were filled with dismay and terror. For 40 long days, this terrible routine continued. They felt helpless, trapped by their own fear. They prayed to God for help, but it felt like their prayers were just whispers lost in the wind. They needed a hero, someone with courage so strong it could swallow up all their fear. But as they looked around at each other's frightened faces, they saw no heroes, only scared soldiers facing a very, very big problem. The giant's name was Goliath. He came from a place called Gath. The armor gleamed and shone in the sunlight, making him look like a walking fortress. His spear was as thick as a weaver's beam. The iron point on its end was heavier than a small child. A soldier walked in front of him just to carry his enormous shield. Every morning he strode into the middle of the valley of Elah. He would stand there, a mountain of a man. He let out a booming laugh that echoed across the valley, full of mockery and scorn. "Choose one man to come down and fight me. If your man can fight me and kill me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, then you will be our slaves and serve us. I defy the armies of Israel today. Give me a man so we can fight." When King Saul and the Israelite soldiers heard this, they were filled with dismay and terror. They were completely discouraged. His words were like sharp rocks breaking their spirit, crushing their courage until nothing was left but a pile of dust and fear. Far away from the scary valley and the armies, in a peaceful little town called Bethlehem, life went on as usual. There, a young boy named David was taking care of his father's sheep. David was the youngest of 8 brothers. His 3 oldest brothers were soldiers in King Saul's army, standing on that very hill, trembling with fear. David was not a soldier. He was a shepherd. His job was to lead the sheep to green grass and to lead them to fresh water, and to protect them from hungry lions and bears that might try to attack the flock. He was young, but he was strong and brave. One day, David's father, a man named Jesse, called him over. Jesse was old and worried about his sons at the battlefront. He said, "David, I want you to take this roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread to your brothers." David was an obedient son. He woke up very early the next morning, left the sheep with another shepherd, loaded up the food, and started his long journey to the valley of Elah. When David arrived, he could hear the shouting of the armies as they lined up for battle. He ran to the battle lines to find his brothers. He wanted to greet them and give them the food from their father. As he was talking with them, a sudden hush fell over the Israelite soldiers. David turned to see what everyone was looking at. There, striding out from the Philistine camp, was the giant. It was Goliath. David watched as the massive man took his usual spot in the middle of the valley and began to shout his defiant challenge, his voice booming with arrogance and pride. David was shocked by what he saw and heard, but he was even more shocked by the reaction of the Israelite soldiers. As Goliath roared his challenge, the men around David began to back away, their faces pale with terror.
"Have you seen this man? He comes out every day to defy Israel."
David couldn't believe it. This one man was holding the entire army of God's people hostage with his words. A fire started to burn in David's heart. It wasn't fear, it was anger. How could this giant be allowed to mock God's army like this? David turned to the soldiers standing near him, his eyes flashing with a righteous fire.
What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? His voice was clear and strong, cutting through the whispers of fear.
Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should be allowed to defy the armies of the living God?
David's words were bold. He didn't see a giant that was too big to fight. He saw an enemy of God that was too loud to ignore. The soldiers repeated the king's promise of riches, marriage. David was focused on something else entirely, God's honor. When David's oldest brother Eliab heard him talking like this, he became very angry.
"Why have you come down here?" Eliab snapped, looking down at his youngest brother. "And who did you leave those few sheep with in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle."
Eliab thought David was just being a show-off, a little kid trying to act big and important. He didn't understand the deep faith that was motivating David.
David was not discouraged by his brother's harsh words. He simply replied, "Now what have I done? Can't I even speak?"
He turned away from his brother and started asking the other soldiers the same questions. He wanted everyone to know that he was serious. Word began to spread through the camp like wildfire. A young shepherd boy was talking about fighting the giant. The soldiers, who had been paralyzed by fear for so long, were amazed and intrigued by this boy's confidence. Soon, the news of David's brave talk reached the ears of the most important person in the camp. Someone went and told King Saul what the boy was saying. The king, desperate for any glimmer of hope, immediately sent for David. The young shepherd was brought before the tall, worried king. David stood there, not with the posture of a soldier, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew a great secret. He looked King Saul straight in the eye and said the most astonishing thing the king had heard in 40 days.
"Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him."
King Saul looked down at the young man standing before him. He saw a boy, not a warrior. But David was not finished. He stood his ground respectfully and began to tell the king a story. "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep," David explained, his voice steady and sure.
"When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine.
Go, may the Lord be with you."
I cannot go in these because I am not used to them."
Instead, he picked up his familiar shepherd's staff, went down to the stream, and carefully chose smooth, round stones from the stream bed. With his staff in one hand and his trusty sling in the other, he was ready. This was his armor. This was his weapon. His true protection was his faith in God. When Goliath saw him coming, he couldn't believe his eyes. He had been expecting a great warrior, but instead he saw a boy carrying nothing but a stick.
"You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty."
David started running toward the giant, placed a stone in his sling, whirled it around his head, and let the stone fly straight and true. The stone struck Goliath squarely on the forehead. He swayed for a moment. Then, with a tremendous crash that shook the ground, he fell face down. The giant was dead. When the Philistine army saw their champion fall, they turned and ran. The Israelite soldiers let out a mighty roar of victory and chased after the fleeing Philistines. David had won. The shepherd boy had defeated the mighty warrior with a single stone and an unshakable faith in God. The impossible had just happened. This timeless story teaches us that we all face giants in our lives. Problems at school, fears that hold us back, or difficult situations that seem impossible to overcome. The lesson from David is to not look at the size of your giant, but to look at the size of your God. It teaches us to have faith and to trust that with God's help we can overcome anything. And that is how we can face our own giants, with the skills we have and a faith that is bigger than any fear.